Okay, you should have your quiz back now, and we're going to look at the answers. Make sure that you've got version A from the first day. They'll just say version A. The other days have different letters for their versions. And we'll take a look at all these answers. Remember your assignment. You've got a sheet there where you're going to write down for each problem what advice you need to give yourself to get it right the next time when you see that kind of problem. If you've got it right the first time, just write, I got it. Otherwise, give yourself some advice or give yourself a reminder. Maybe it was something about getting started on the problem. Maybe you got stuck in the middle because you couldn't find the right P and Q, or maybe your signs were wrong, or maybe you forgot to find the greatest common factor. Whatever it is, give yourself a piece of advice so that you can do better on the next one. So let's take a look at the first problem. All right, it says factor the function f of x equals x squared plus 7x plus 12 completely. Don't let the f of x part bother you. Most of the time when we deal with polynomials, they will be part of a function or in some sort of context. And the word completely suggests maybe there's a greatest common factor, but I don't see one. So let's just get right to the trinomial factoring, which is splitting the middle term. So we're going to split that middle term. It's going to give us x squared plus something x plus something else x plus 12. And I need some hints to fill in those blanks. I do get two hints. First of all, I know what p times q equals. P times q is always the first number times the last number. So that's going to be 1 times 12. 1 times 12 is 12. And already I can make a list of things that multiply to be 12. 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And that's it. That's all the stuff that multiplies to be 12. But which one's it going to be? Well, that's where I need the second clue, which is what p plus q equals. And p plus q always equals that middle number. In this case, that's that 7. So two things that multiply to be 12 add to be 7. Of those pairs I already found, which ones add up to be 7? Just the 3 and the 4. So I've found my p and q. They go in those blanks, and now I can group it. That's the whole reason we wanted to find p and q, so we can split it off and group it. And what's the first pair have in common? What goes into x squared and 3x? Well, they both have an x in common, so that's my greatest common factor for that pair. Then I can divide both of those by x to see what's left, which is going to leave us with, just really takes out one x from each, leaves us with x plus 3. Now the second pair, I have a lot of people trying to tell me that 2 is what goes into both of these. And 2 does go into those, but there's something bigger. It's 4 that goes into both of those. It's always going to be plus whatever's going on over here. So plus the 4. And what's left when I divide each of these by 4? Well, the 4's cancel out here. I just get x. 12 divided by 4 is 3. I can be sure that this is going well if my two parentheses are the same, and they are. I don't need them twice, I just need them once. X plus 3. The stuff that's not x plus 3, stuff I pulled out earlier, that's what goes in my other parentheses, so the other parentheses is x plus 4. There was no greatest common factor, nothing else going on, nowhere to go with that. That's my answer, x plus 3 times x plus 4. Now, before we move on to the next problem, let's take a quick note that those parentheses, the x plus 3, x plus 4, we've seen that 3 and 4 somewhere before. They were my p and q. Are p and q always in my end parentheses? Matter of fact, that's pretty rare for them to end up there. It only happens that p and q are in our final parentheses if our leading coefficient is 1, the very first number in front of the x squared term, in front of the very first term, is 1. If it is 1, once we find p and q, we know they're going to end up in the parentheses with x, because I just need those first terms to each be x, so they can multiply to be x squared. I don't need any numbers on it. If I get any other number there at the beginning, it's going to mess it up, and p and q won't both be in my final answers. Maybe one will, maybe neither will. But the good news is if you see that 1 is your first number, find P and Q and you can throw it right in parentheses with X's or whatever letter you have uh, to get your answer. Save you maybe a couple steps. And as we saw in this quiz, a couple steps could be 30 seconds or a minute can make the difference between getting a problem right or not even trying a problem because we didn't get to it. All right, let's try problem 2. All right, 2x squared minus x minus 15, we're going to factor that completely. There's that word again, completely, that has me looking for a greatest common factor. But a plain x is a hard thing to match, especially if one of the terms has no x's. So no greatest common factor. So we can get right to the business of splitting the middle term because we did have 3 terms, and that's how we handle 3 terms. 2x squared plus something else x minus 15. We know that those 2 missing numbers multiply to be the first number times the last number, 2 times negative 15, which is negative 30. Already I know something about the nature of my numbers. If they multiply to be negative, that means I've got to have one positive and one negative. There's no other way to do it. I also know that if they multiply to be 30, the only pairs that multiply to be 30, 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6. It's going to be one of those pairs of numbers. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. Which one's which? Well, what they add to be is going to help me figure that out. And since these add to be that negative x, it's not a negative x, it's a negative 1 that we can squeeze in there. We need 2 things that add to be negative 1. The fact that they add to be negative, I already know it's 1 positive and 1 negative. But the only way 1 positive and 1 negative can add to be negative is if the big one is the negative. The positive is going to be smaller. So if we take all of these bigger terms and make them all negative, now I should be able to find the pair of numbers that all of those pairs multiply to be negative 30. Which ones add to be negative 1? That's 5 and negative 6. I could put them in either place, but I usually put the negative first. It's going to make my life a little easier, fewer sign mistakes. Now we can group them. What goes into each of these pairs? What's our greatest common factor for each? This first pair, 2 goes into both those numbers, and they both have an x. So we'll pull out a 2x. Divide each of those by 2x. Well, the 2's gone, one of the x's is gone, but it'll still have an x. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3, and that x will go away completely. Plus whatever I get over here. What do these have in common? Well, 5 is what they have in common. Divide each of those by 5. That's going to leave me with x minus 3. It's going well if those are the same, and they are. So I only need that once, x minus 3. What goes in the other parentheses? Well, that's the stuff I pulled out. That's going to be a 2x plus 5. It's worth a quick double check at the end. Make sure you don't have a greatest common factor in either one of these pairs. We definitely don't, so that's going to be my answer. X minus 3 times 2x plus 5, and it doesn't really matter which one comes first. That is a very standard factoring trinomials problem. It should only take you about a minute. The longest part is finding the P and Q, but once you've found it, it should be pretty automatic to go through the grouping part of it. If you find that it's taking you more time than that, maybe you just need to practice some more. Getting on that delta math and practicing is a really good way to do it. And there's plenty of other places to find practice problems. We've had several assignments where we were practicing these. If you haven't done those assignments, maybe now is a good time to pick those up. All right, this one also says factor completely. We've got 5x squared minus 30x plus 40. That word completely always has me looking for that greatest common factor, and guess what? This one has it. What is my greatest common factor? What goes into 5x squared and negative 30x and positive 40? Well, 5 goes into all of those things. So if we pull out a 5 from all of them, we just divide off a 5 to see what's left. It's going to leave us with x squared minus 6x plus 8. So we've got the 5 outside, then it's just a trinomial. Now it's still a trinomial. We know 3 terms means split the middle term. X squared plus blank x plus 8. So I need 2 numbers that multiply to be, well, the first times the last. That's 1 times 8. So 1 times 8 is 8. 2 things that add to be the middle term, which means negative 6. Once again, when they multiply to be positive, like this positive 8, that means we've got 2 of the same signs, 2 positives or 2 negatives. But if they also add to be negative, it can't be 2 positives, it's got to be 2 negatives. It's not a very long list of things that multiply to be 8, 1 and 8, or 2 and 4, and the 2 and 4 have it. Once again, both have to be negative. So x squared plus negative 2x plus negative 4x plus 8, and I can group it from there and keep going, or I could remember that I can jump right to my answer right now, because that leading coefficient right back here was that positive 1. If there's nothing in front of the x squared or a 1 in front of the x squared, that means my p and q that I find are going to go right into my parentheses. So my parentheses are going to be x plus negative 2 and x plus negative 4. It always works that way when you've got a 1 in front of the x squared. We probably wouldn't call it x plus negative 2. We'd probably call it x minus 2 and x minus 4, but those are our parentheses. We can save ourselves some steps. Now, sometimes you're halfway through those steps before you realize you can save yourself steps. So, don't back up and erase it. Just get the problem finished. Except there is one thing missing from this answer, and that's that greatest common factor. Don't forget about the 5 we pulled out in the beginning. Make sure it finds its way into the answer. So there you go. There's your 3 questions answered with the work shown, how you get through them. If you struggled on this quiz, please practice some more of these. You've got a station coming up next that's going to have you factoring just a mix of stuff to help get you ready for that second mini quiz. I hope you did figure out what went wrong and gave yourself some advice what you can do better next time, because we do have another one of these mini quizzes on Friday.